Well, I was told hour and a half, basically. Now, let me be brief. Government at the federal level has to take care of itself, and it's got a long way to go. But government at the federal level also has a very important role, and one that I take seriously, and that I think we've made some good beginnings on. And one of them is standard setting. Decades ago, before I was a congressman, I sat on the board of and actually chaired the group that puts on the Consumer Electronics Show. Well, the Electronic Industries Association, which is the parent company, sets standards. And it's one of the many groups that set standards. And standards are what makes all things possible. No city can say, oh, this is how we're going to do it, and the next city does it different, the next city does it different, and then expect the interoperability that we all want to see. That's where the United States has strength, is in fact, we've been a global standard setter in many areas. What's amazing, though, is that a number of years ago, the federal government was one way, the private sector was another. And that's what we have to rectify. When we look at the ability to work remotely, the private sector is doing better. When we look at the ability to be interoperable, you know, everyone takes for granted that large and even not large corporations, they invoice and receipt without ever printing a piece of paper. They validate without it. Accounting systems get to the end of the month and they poll the bank to find out whether the checks have cleared. They know whether what their accounts receivable are, not, oh, well, at the end of the month, we'll go through a 3 or 4 month manual process to discover it. But that happens in the federal government all the time. Even the so-called auditable financials of the federal government run a year behind. So knowing that your book's balanced a year ago doesn't give you a lot of good, warm, fuzzy if you're trying to make business decisions. It doesn't do it for the government. Now, we've had some successes, and I'll go through one because it's ongoing. There was a piece of legislation called the Data Act. And it was one of those brilliant things that smart staff helped me write. We wrote it, we passed it not once, but twice through the House, unanimously. In the third Congress, some 6 years into this standard requirement for the federal government, the Senate discovered it, created an identical bill, and sent it to the House and said, would you pass the Senate bill? And we said, of course, we'll pass your brilliant bill. As a result, Senator Warner, who was the author of it, quote, in the Senate, continues to push this administration to do what the Bush administration was first required to do. The Obama administration made some progress on. The Trump administration did a little bit of progress on. And this administration has a lot more to do. Today, the chances of your being able to go online and get information in a machine readable format, not a PDF that you then have to try to decipher, but actual where you can search, and not just word search, but search for any number of if you will, concepts and numbers and get them. Your chances now are better than 50-50, but they need to be 100%. And that's the goal. I'm gonna, I think, close by saying this. One of the challenges with standard settings that I work on every day is the fact that those who create standards often create standards for profit. You know, I'll create this wonderful standard. It just happens to have a patent that causes you to have to pay me. We have been working in Washington, because we have the sole authority for this, to say that if in fact a patent, what they call an essential market patent or essential patent, if a patent gets put into a standard, then in fact, it's not that you have to give it away for free, but you must patent it to everyone, and that price has to reflect the fact that government has mandated, which makes it relatively de minimis for free. That sort of a push is a fair warning to everyone that we want to create standards. We are not creating standards to allow people to profit from it. It doesn't mean we don't want to have intellectual property, but it does mean that the federal government takes seriously the balance between the inventor and the public, because the inventor needs to be able to profit from their intellectual property, and the public needs the access, which is the whole reason that we have the Senate. That balancing act is something that we're working on every day. So I said last, and I hope to get an applause when I said finally, but you haven't caught on to the it's nothing to enjoy the speech, it's that you're glad I'm ending. We have one lesson, and this is something the mayor and I have talked about, commiserated on Friday when we get together. We know that telework works. We know that Zoom calls work. We also know that we have fallen behind remote working. And that is the lesson that we're going to have to not just learn, but learn from. There are some things where, to be honest, you can be more productive if you're adding to your workday or your efficiency that additional meeting you wouldn't otherwise have. But as we speak, we still don't have enough baby formula, and the FDA has about 25% of their cars in the parking lot that they would have if everyone was back to work. Do you see a correlation? I certainly do. The State Department is almost a year behind in visas and other activities because, quite frankly, they telework on something where they couldn't really work very effectively or efficiently remotely. So even though they had conferences, they didn't issue the visas, they got behind. And today, if you want to get a passport, every passport that's issued is essentially an emergency passport issue. That's a lesson for all of us, which is we want to encourage remote work, we want to facilitate it, and all of our companies are making those investments. And we certainly want our servers to be robust and defendable against cyber attacks, even while we are able to work remotely. All of that will be achieved. We also have to realize that nothing takes the place of what we're doing here today. Seeing each other, interfacing, and having the kind of interaction that you cannot do exactly as well or as efficiently remotely. So, Paul, I think I overstayed mine. Do I get to take questions? Just sit down and shut up.
You're a congressman. Let's take some questions.
Absolutely. Okay.
Anybody have any questions for the congressman on this?
Otherwise, I do have the other 45 minutes.
Well, let's talk about.
Yes.
So once the federal government sets the standards for this IT program, as far as the data sharing, are they gonna also like pass that down to the state level? So they can use it and down to the county and down to the city. Is that the plan, or is it just?
So, this is a great question. The data interoperability that the Data Act requires concerns only federal, but it also concerns any database that the federal government pays for. So the answer is yes, that process is already underway. One of the challenges is, that, and we dealt with this, we modernized the county of San Diego. There are legacy systems throughout the federal government, there are legacy systems throughout state and local. Those will be the last ones to come online, and that is one of our challenges is when will those legacy systems go away? In some cases, and we dealt with the county on this when I 20 years ago when I sat on the board of modernization of San Diego County. When you had custom software written for you, you really like it, and you're looking at, well, this is cheaper and better than SAP or whoever else. I don't want to make the switch. We dealt with that, and that's going on all over the country. So the answer is there will be legacy systems for a very long time, and there's no way for the federal government to force local municipalities to do it. But I will tell you, the leadership at the federal level is we are investing to get rid of those legacy systems, the ones that still run COBOL and Pascal and Fortran. They're going away. They're going away.
They'll make them available.
The data format structure is being made available to the states, where all of our data formats are publicly available. So a state that wants to interface knows it. Is there anyone here from a university? Okay, which university?
Cal State University, San Marcos.
Okay, Cal State San Marcos, good example. I worked primarily in the past with UCSD, but they already, UCSD already implemented, but the Cal system also has the interface for their grants. So their grant applications and their awards and the requirements in those awards are all a data process where their structure and federal structure now match. And of course, there's far more federal grants than there are state grants.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's an example where we have some good successes. Universities are a very good one. And I will say one of the areas that the Data Act was intended to get to, and we pushed and we finally got there, was that for better or worse, professors have a bad habit of working on the grant that they have, a couple of side projects. And one of our goals was to make sure that the federal funding did not get diverted to personal projects. They might be very worthwhile. Make a grant application for it. Don't simply take your interns and your staff and have them work on a second project. The Data Act is making that much more transparent because we can trace all the way down 3 levels down, which we couldn't do before. Yes, sir.
Does the Data Act take into account the supply chain issues, like making sure that we can see who has PPE or vaccines and move the appropriate places?
The answer is it could, but it doesn't. This is one of the challenges is the Data Act was primarily, for example, the Data Act mandates a level of transparency that makes it quite easy for Homeland Security and other government agencies. Obviously, there's access questions on any of this. We can see every ship at sea, every port, every container, what's in that cargo manifest. So we can know logistically what's available where it is. And of course, some of it is used, for duty and for other reasons, but from a standpoint of hazards and a standpoint of logistics, we can see it. One of the challenges is to make it more broadly available so that others can use it. It is one of the areas that the federal mandate in the Data Act, UPS, FedEx, these others, they're all using that data very, very effectively now to manage their logistics. And the nice thing is that when it goes from, let's say, American President's line to a domestic trucking company here, it's all digitally interfaceable, so they can control and follow it. So the good news is yes. The bad news is, quite frankly, once it leaves that area, it becomes just domestic travel. In many cases, it's not transparent for that purpose. I will say this: when I visited Walmart and I visited one Amazon facility, I was incredibly impressed at their logistics use of this data. They really do get it. And it's one of the lessons for the federal government is FEMA hasn't done enough to reverse support that. And they are working on a program with, I think it's 11 of the major logistics companies, including obviously FedEx, UPS, and Amazon, and the post office, which we don't always think of as a logistics company, but it is a large one. They are working on that specifically for FEMA emergency work. And that's one of the benefits of data being in a format where it is, how many of you have ever worked in an Excel spreadsheet? Okay, so since almost all of you have worked in it, you understand that it's one thing to have a whole bunch of rows and cells. It's another thing to have them uniquely identified so you can line them up without having to produce some sort of an advanced table. That's what the Data Act requires. And of course, that requires that when you create a nomenclature for something, that it translates to where it's predictable throughout the databases. And to be honest, I don't expect anyone to get it right the first time or the second time. This would be an ongoing process. But as long as The advancement of artificial intelligence allows machines to tell other machines that it didn't line up and then work on the fix. You do have sort of this automatic Scrabble capability that I've seen work where it doesn't line up. They run how should it line up, and they make it line up, and then it's pretty neat to see. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Jennings, Deputy Director of Economic Development for the City of Escondido. I love
She's so enjoyed working with Escondido. It's a joy. It must be your efforts and your mayor. The mayor and I obviously have a mutual admiration society. It's sometimes embarrassing. And I can't believe the Army and the Marine Corps can get along that well. Yeah.
it's pretty steady. So my question's related to kind of on the staff level, we're really excited to adopt new technologies, and it's something that as a city we're striving toward. And oftentimes with everyone's busy workloads, different departments end up adopting new technology to become efficient individually. And so as this initiative rolls out nationally, what are your recommendations for us to stay involved and aware of what's happening so that we can implement this at a local level in an efficient way?
Well, there are two things. First of all, the Data Act required a number of things, and then another federal IT reform bill, the TARA, also required certain things. One of it required was that the chief technology, chief information officer, the roles are slightly different, but that person have budget authority. Because what we found historically is an agency had budget authority, and then you had your chief technical person. Wrong. If somebody has the technical expertise that they're responsible for the project, then they need to have budget authority. They can have a boss, but the budget authority and the ability to stop something before it goes wrong. Because the biggest challenge you have is that a project is not going to arrive on time, on budget, but nobody wants to tell anyone that. So they wait till they run out of money and the project isn't finished to report it back. That's where any entity, and we'll just take a large city like Escondido, you need to have a single person who has the budget authority. And it can't be the mayor, it can't be the city council, it can't even be the city manager, because by definition, that's not the city manager's job. It's got to be a chief technology or chief information officer who's responsible. That is one of the simple secrets, but it also creates that person that then is the interface to the city and to the state for that interoperability. I love questions like that because it happened to be in the legislation. Yes.
On this federal level or state, the standards that include, it's nice technology to compile and share data. However, there are controls or cybersecurity in place where by an enemy state level, and just simply transporting items here and there. How is that well secured? Is there any measures that are in place? Because right now, that's one of the top topics in a war industry, but what happened about that? And so just curious about.
Well, or for that matter, what happened with the dollars that went out to prisoners, billions in this state? They sat there, they didn't even hack the system, they just made applications and the system wasn't smart to keep up. There's no one answer to cybersecurity because there will, our court system, our federal court system was hacked successfully, and the details are classified, but it's been made public that, the hackers were from one of our friendly adversaries. I don't want to badmouth Russia because, quite frankly, China twice a day, the FBI opens up a new investigation on China hacking. That's how often they're actually getting something through these activities. So we have real enemies and they're state actors. That, to a certain extent, there's a hardware component to it and there's a software component. But here's where the Data Act helps. The easiest way to lose something that you want to protect is that it's mixed in and mixed up, and you don't know that it's there. Classified material that is on an unclassified network, material databases that you don't think are significant, so you're not guarding them, but ultimately what happens in email, somebody emails a password to somebody else, and so the hacker simply gets the password with a more secured site by going through the unsecured site. Happens constantly. It's one of the great, whether you say, the best way to mine, okay, is to go into the dirt. Well, I'll give you an example, and I'll use it not because it's political, but because it's sort of humorous. Hunter Biden's laptop, Hunter couldn't remember all his passwords. So he put them all in his laptop. And so when you got his laptop, one of his files had all of his passwords. And so as you continue to hear more about his laptop and new discoveries, some of them are because people are still mining the laptop to get passwords to go check out other stuff. That's common, and we can't change it overnight. In other words, we can't change the fact that, right next to the keyboard is the password because the guy can't remember. And if it's not next to it, it's underneath it. And if it's not underneath it, it's in a drawer. Some of these things we can't. What we can do is require the legacy systems that were not engineered from the ground up to be cyber protected are created. And I'll give you a good example, and the courts was a good example. The court system wasn't a terribly old legacy system, but it had no protection to detect mass draws. It had no port to user software. How many of you know about port to user software? Okay, a couple of you do. It sounds like no big thing, but let's understand, we all log in at a certain port. If suddenly a port has 50 different users all asking for information or information that would be 50 different users, all you need is software that says that's an anomaly and reports it in real time or even stops it. Why? Well, because 50 people can't log in at one port. And yet that is one of the things we discovered was happening was in order to get what they wanted, they were essentially sequentially grabbing different databases. Good software today, from a cyber standpoint, already knows that it not only knows hard patterns like locking, the old days you locked down, this IP is only good for this user and only on that MAC address for that computer. Very high overhead, good security, but pain in the butt. Today, there's no reason you can't dynamically accept the fact that anyone can log in anywhere. But if they're an anomaly because you log in, that user is logged in on the other end of the world, and suddenly 4 minutes later, they're logging in the United States, and if they logged in Asia, you go, well, wait a second, that anomaly needs to be reported. That kind of software is what is being written today for cyber. Any legacy software, whether it's state, federal, or local, isn't going to have that. Remote users need to have software that's smarter than the old days when we had a modem and you call up and say, would you turn the modem on so I can log in? And then you turn the modem off afterwards so they couldn't log in anymore. That kind of security, we're not doing it. How many of you were like me and actually remember when you used to have to call a number twice and it would turn the modem on and then you could call it? That was early security. We can't count on that anymore because we're online all the time. Other questions? How about experience?
Well, there's just a comment from you on the affordable connectivity plan. There's a plan to subsidize access for low-income households. And, we're working with that as an ISP for AT&T. We're working with trying to help users get logged on or get approved from the federal government through the FCC, but the application is online and people that don't have internet access. We have to support and help people who sign up. So, just wonder what your thoughts on the affordable connectivity plan are and maybe on the E program, broadband equity and access to point, $62 billion, I think, for improving broadband access.
this is not going to surprise you. I think government has gotten too intrusive in the idea that we must subsidize data access. And here's the reason. When you throw out numbers like $62 billion, well, that is a lot of money. No, it's 10 trillion. Wait a second here. How many people have looked at the homeless right now in this city? We all have. You can't miss them. How many homeless don't have one of these? They all do. The fact is, when I entered Congress 22 years ago, and I'm not trying to be unfair or lecturing, but it's time that we move to the next step of access. And I want to get to that. 22 years ago, I was told we had this huge gap and we had to close it, and that South Korea was ahead of us. Because South Korea had mandated universal access at 256 kilobytes. Yeah, I know I see the big smile on the back. But they did. They had universal access at faster than the fastest modem. Of course, today we all would laugh when 5G is it's actually rolling out now and rolling out where you look at your download and upload speeds, and it's pretty impressive. Matter of fact, sometimes this is faster than the home Cox cable connection. The question isn't, do people have access? It's, first of all, are we paying for access multiple times? And that becomes one of the challenges, is that, do kids in school have access? Do they not have access at home? Do they have it here? Do they not have it there? And how many times are we going to pay for it? One of the challenges is, and this is where I think the federal government does have a role, is we need to be able to micro-target the actual lack of access, which often is the rural poor. Okay, and and in some cases, and Mayor, this will probably be one of those veins of every mayor's existence. In some cases, universal access to Wi-Fi is going to be cheaper than the idea that we're going to create individual, access. The other part of it is that the speed with which these are becoming obsolete. We don't have a durable access capability, and that again is one of the challenges. This is a $1,000 phone that will be obsolete in a year, and if you take the cheapest one, it's maybe $300. It'd be obsolete. I said a year, but I mean more like 3 to 5. But the dollar figure on this is more than the 62 billion. So one of the questions that I keep asking is, what is the role of the federal government? The federal government really has to be to roll out the low-speed universal access and make it fast enough to do what it needs to do, which is not stream 4K. And so that's where there is this debate of how many gigs per month should be free, how many different ways should be delivered. I've got to tell you, I fight with my colleagues back and forth every day on that. The same as we do on 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, we doubled the child tax credit. Dramatic increase in the funding for daycare. And at the chamber lunch downtown 2 days ago, the subject was, well, we need to do a lot more because it's not affordable. Well, you can chase the affordable forever if you keep moving the goalpost. And that becomes one of the questions is, how much do we move the goalpost before we start saying, hold it, we've got to create universal access, but we've got to micro-target how much of it is going to be subsidized when most people already have sufficient data, at least on one device. Now, if you disagree, why don't you follow up, because it's one of my frustrations.
I think it's a really good point, and the federal government in defining what broadband access is saying that you don't have internet if it's not 100 megabits down and 10 or 20 megabits up. That then opens those dollars to go towards people that already have internet, maybe at 25 down or 3 up. And that money is not going to go to subsidize rural connectivity where there's no access, they're completely unserved. And so I think that's the issue that should grapple with by your.
I do constantly. My mother uses about 4% of that's now low speed. Because all she gets is the few emails, mostly jokes from my brother that he's got from somebody else. And she laughs at him and enjoys them. But she's happy with that and her cable TV. She is not without the ability to have more if she needed it. She doesn't need it. And but you hit the nail on the head is when there's no access, we need to make sure there's at least one point of access. When there is access, we need to ask, do you need more? And, you know, the homeless person with 3, what we used to call Obama phones, you know, has enough access for the lifestyle they're choosing to live. And they may have more than they need. Well, we're subsidizing that, and it's a not insignificant program, and it continues to be one of those things where I don't know where it ends, but it gets more expensive every year. Well, some of the rural programs, which are a different technology to get that long reach, where we're not going to run cable, we have to come up with essentially long-range Wi-Fi that can work there. And we need the bandwidth, and we need the rollout. Other comments? I mean, what are you facing? Because you might as well make this a town hall meeting and tell me what I need.
Yes, all the things that are going on in our world, especially over in Taiwan, country in the entire world that is making semiconductor chips. We have known for the last 4 to 5 years that this is going to be an issue. Now with our speaker going over there and causing more issues, what is the federal government finally going to step up and say, we can build them there? Yes, of course, they're going to be more expensive because everything is obviously wants to disappear. But for our own national security, for our own ways that we're trying to do things, why are we relying on one country that is kind of compromised when it comes to if they are here for China or whatever? Why are we stuck in that position being the greatest country in the world that we are building in here, securing our own people here, as opposed to really on this shut down, the whole world shut down?
You know, it's kind of like, you know, why if you go to a major university and you go to the engineering lab, you notice that everyone there wasn't born here, or at least looks like they weren't born here. The answer sometimes of why somebody does better is they work hard. They wanted more. Taiwan and South Korea wanted to succeed in semiconductor, and they worked hard. They built the engineers, they developed the technology. It was Taiwan Semiconductor and Samsung that announced that they are now going this year into full production on 3 nano technology, and they're with acceptable yields. And they're going to get to 2 nano by year after next in production. You know what? We need that breakthrough. But here's the amazing thing. The machines that actually produce this are all made in the United States. They belong to 2 American companies. We export the machines that they are going to do this on. Yes, they've developed their own intellectual property, and they're very careful to guard some of the techniques that allow them to get high yields on it. But they simply applied themselves. One of my good friends is at Lam, but either one of the companies that are making these machines will tell you that they make the magic that gets you 90% of the way. Why did we not build fabs? Well, for us old guys, by comparison, I remember when Craig Barrett was the CEO of Intel, and he announced, and this is 20 plus years ago, that Intel would never build another fab in California. The reason was he couldn't get clean water and reliable electricity. And oh, by the way, even back then, it was $2 billion to build a plant. So that's going up dramatically more. But the fact is, if the capital cost was a factor, but the biggest thing was they needed partners that were going to guarantee them the water and the electricity they needed in a completely reliable way if they were going to do it. They needed to know that their time schedule from beginning of project to beginning of production was predictable. They got that in Taiwan. They got that in South Korea. They even got that in mainland China. And that's the challenge that we face, which by the way is not a federal challenge. It is a challenge for whatever cities or state wants those jobs. Intel chose to go to Ohio because they were given clear understanding that anything and everything, they'd at least get an answer on in a day, not a year. That the state would work hand in hand with them, and they had pre-cleared a lot of the characteristics of where their factories go. So they're breaking ground as we speak on that facility, along with Arizona for Taiwan Semiconductor. And that was federal money. I mean, the earlier part of the CHIPS Act, which now just added another $53 billion, is an inducement. But our challenge is we've got to produce the engineers, we've got to produce the desire. What's sad is the actual cost of producing a chip is machines and capital much more than it is and availability of people. How much you pay the people is relatively de minimis. Trust me, Taiwan does not own the business because they pay their people less, because the labor portion of it, particularly the initial fab, absolutely, it's about machines and capital investment. So we can do it. We are going to be bringing more of it back at scale. I'm most concerned, though, that right now, nobody has a secret sauce in the United States for that 2 nano, that higher power, lower power consumption, higher speed processors that we need, and catching up. All of us know that Qualcomm is a good example of a great company that doesn't own a single foundry. You don't own a foundry, it's a bragging point, but not to me. One of the challenges is that they depend on somebody else to know how to make their chips. And that puts them sometimes at a disadvantage. And I've told that to the CEO there that I wouldn't be proud to not own at least one foundry that you know what you need to know about what others are producing for you. Yes.
What about the access to the minerals that are necessary to make these chips? This seems to be an issue that evidently we abandoned here in this country, that other countries have taken the lead on. Is that accurate?
Well, there's some accuracy to the fact that we've become unfriendly to mining. And by the way, oil is a form of mining. Natural gas is a form of mining, but so is lithium. So are rarer metals. Now, in some cases, like uranium, we happen to be one of the richest countries in that. In some cases, we are not the richest country in certain minerals. That's where we're in competition with China, but China is winning. China is in Africa buying up some of it with, techniques that I don't approve of, like bribes, kickbacks, or even toppling governments in order to get mineral rights. That's not our style, but it is one of the challenges that when we have to go elsewhere in the world, it puts us at a risk, and that concerns me. But when we have the resources here in the United States, and we're not willing to deal with it, and I'll give you an example, which is not high tech, but it's a good example. We are a source for copper. We have copper mines. We have closed a number of the copper mines at a time when we need more copper. But we've also, when we mine copper, you know what we do with it? We mine it and then we export it to China. We then dig up some coal and we export it to China. China takes the coal and the copper and smelts it. Now, it's a dirty job and we wouldn't want to have that dirty air. But when Paul, the term is crap, right? When crap goes in the air in China, it comes down here. If you want to know where acid rain comes from in California, you can't make acid rain here and have it land here. You make acid rain here, it probably lands in Scotland. Chinese acid rain from their high sulfur and other coals lands here and all the way to the East Coast. So one of the things that's really dumb is us actually mining here when we even do mine, and then exporting it to a place that does it dirtier than we do. That's it. We need to come up with changes. I'm old enough to remember that some things don't change. And one of the things that doesn't change is the basic law of economics. There are three things that create wealth. You can mine it, you can manufacture, or you can grow it. Everything else that people think creates wealth is just pushing wealth around. Do we have any lawyers in the room? See what I mean? Wealth pushers. We have any accountants in the room? No wealth counters? Okay, we have any financial managers in the room? There we go. Wealth pushers around. There's nothing wrong with that. We need all of that. But those foundries, those factories, those mining operations, those smelting operations, they're part of the three things that create wealth: mining, manufacturing, and growing agriculture. And if we always remember that if we export those three, any of them we export, we're exporting our wealth. I don't want to make my wealth on the back of somebody in China, but I don't want somebody in China making wealth from the fact that we've exported our ability to create wealth. And that's the balance that we're dealing with. And return those boundaries to the United States is the beginning of us developing our own IP. So that when we're making 2 nano chips, we're going to know how to make them rather than hoping that China doesn't bomb Taiwan and that North Korea doesn't bomb South Korea. Because if they do, I don't know where we get into it. Yes, sir.
So, are you aware of like what they're going to do with the lithium deposits and the salt and sea?
Yeah, we're going to see if they can actually get enough of it. For those who don't know, as the salt and sea dries up, it is an environmental disaster. Now, if we can turn the environmental disaster into even close to a break even by stripping out of its salts and then it could be a win-win. We still have the problem. We have to keep something for the migratory birds. Yeah, because that's a separate problem. But that's a small portion of the water. So it is being looked at. I got to be honest. People tell me it's theoretically possible, but no one has said that they'd like a contract for it. Because if somebody would walk in and say they want a contract for it, I give them for $1, I give you the whole salt and sea that they got if they could actually prove that they could do it. But it is certainly a possibility. And lithium is going to be two problems: getting enough of it and reprocessing it once we're done with it. The other day I was down at the San Vicente Dam, and they want to do a pump storage station there. And the pump storage is the oldest, simplest technology you can imagine. It's hydroelectric with motors. You pump the water up when you've got excess power. You bring it back down, generating power when you don't. They're looking at what is essentially 1 foot of the lake or the reservoir every day being pumped up and then brought back down, producing 8 hours of 500 megawatts for 8 hours. Now that's half of a San Onofre nuclear facility for 8 hours. Or another way of putting it is a whole shitload of solar that right now we're throwing away during the day because we have excess being available at 4, 5, 6, 7 o'clock, exactly when we don't have enough power, but we're still trying to air condition our houses. That kind of technology isn't rocket science, but it's the equivalent of 39 football fields of lithium batteries. Yeah, I do not want to think about how long it would take to make 39 football fields of lithium batteries versus a little pond 1,300 feet up on the side of a mountain and pumping it up and down. So sometimes old technology is a whole lot more environmentally friendly than new technology.
So you can use the excess from the solar and wind. Right?
Exactly. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, Enron proposed a site up in Lake Elsinore. At that time, they thought they would buy nuclear power during the day, okay, nuclear power at night, and then give us peak power during the day. Today, the nuclear is gone and we have an excess of solar. So what you're actually going to do is buy during the day and deliver in the afternoon and evening. But the use for pump storage is still real. And that project, they're hoping to get it online in 4 years. The project up at Lake Elsinore is still stalled 25 years later, not for pure environmental reasons, but sort of a petty arguing about the internet. So for all of us, we've got to push for those projects because they're effectively adding to our clean renewable resources. Because otherwise, in the afternoon, either our power goes out or we run generators using fossil fuels. And this is an alternative. And we've got to do more than one, 4 or 5 of them. If we do, we can stop having power outages. Yes, sir.
Just you bringing up nuclear power, I'm just curious with the European energy, this is a little off topic, but the European energy crisis going on, do you think we're going to get any nuclear power plants to try to bring them online at all?
Well, under the Bush administration, there were 5 authorized and funded federally, and only 2 have come online. But the next generation of nuclear, which General Atomics right here in town is part of it, can give us these small nuclear reactors that are they're literally shut down on their own. You don't have a big water problem. You don't have the runaway possibility. And there are a lot of, some U.S. municipalities looking at it. To be honest, a lot of countries around the world have already placed orders. So those are going to be a reality, and they're going to be much safer, much cleaner. We still have 2 problems. One is we need to have a place either to reprocess and or to deposit, and we still haven't done that. And so the killing of Yucca Mountain still creates a long-term problem that we need to figure out. And right here, the fact that if we just headed, west and a little bit north, we've got 3 reactors worth of nuclear rods sitting there. They'll be there in 10,000 years if we don't come up with some place to reprocess it. So from a federal standpoint, yes, I want to continue to push for clean energy, including nuclear, but I also want to push to finally get someplace for and hopefully reprocess some of these materials. I've been told that not just the majority, but the vast majority of the energy in a spent rod is still there. And the French have proven that because they do reprocess it. Yes, ma'am.
A little few minutes back, we talked a little bit about China buying things. How about China buying our farmland? It really irritates me. How can they come in and buy our farmland where they are buying it? How can we keep that from happening?
Well, I mean, if we stop having them get our money because we buy their junk, so that they have money to then buy, that would help. It's frustrating because as much as they're buying it bothers you and it bothers me, they can't actually leave with it. A lot of the things they buy so they can leave with the technology. They can move the jobs. And so it is as bad as buying farmland is. At the end of the day, it's not as destructive as buying technologies where they're essentially buying a company and then moving the technology to China and then laying our people off. So it doesn't mean that I'm happy about that. I'm not even sure I'm happy about Bill Gates buying all that land because I'm trying to figure out what he's going to do with it.
They could use the land for products and ship them to China.
Well, but we would then have American jobs and American benefit. We're already feeding China. As a matter of fact, during the fights between the Trump administration and China, that was one of the settlements because they agreed to buy large amounts of our agriculture as part of, sort of settling some disputes. And then the new administration came in and they didn't keep their promise. But not keeping a promise to the United States is not new. We're still trying to collect World War II debt from Russia. Good luck. But it is a challenge. Here's the other challenge though. Agriculture in the United States only works in large scale. And large scale more and more becomes not the family farm that gets larger because of inheritance taxes and other things. It ends up being corporate farms. And so one of the great questions is, are we in Washington doing enough to protect the ability for the family farm to grow but stay the family farm? And the answer is no, we're not. Every time we have a talk about inheritance, we talk about the family farm and then we don't change the law. We shouldn't have a death tax. We shouldn't have the inability of one generation to pass the farm on to the next generation, but we do. So that continues to be one of the areas that I haven't succeeded, but I've certainly tried to make people know it. Thank you.
One more question. IT modernization, to bring this back full circle. I think about how that is relative to the IRS, probably one of the biggest federal agencies that is tracking
You mean the one that is built back better has 87,000 additional employees? So what we need is twice as many bureaucrats at that particular agency. It's like, couldn't we add more border patrol? Sorry. Go ahead.
So what does this mean for the IRS? What does it mean? Is it going to be more efficient to be able to track?
No. Look, people do not create efficiency. Efficiency is created and it empowers people. Henry Ford hired a lot more people because he made more cars. He actually used less people per car, and that was efficiency. Here's the challenge with the IRS. The IRS is the largest user of IBM mainframes. They are the largest user of IBM legacy software. They are, in fact, dinosaurs when it comes to how they do their computing. They are not a model of efficiency in that sense at all. They blame some of it on the fact that it's a once-a-year tax, but their maintenance budget for IBM mainframes these legacy mainframes is over $1 billion a year. IBM loves them. Here's one of the real challenges. Why do you need 87,000 more auditors? Yes, if you did better, if you built better software, you could use artificial intelligence or machine intelligence to detect better and better anomalies that would cause you to realize somebody's cheating on their taxes, or quite frankly, they should be getting enough information that you shouldn't be filling out a tax return. They should be sending you the information that almost fills out your tax return. Think about it. What do you spend most of your time? How many of you can still do your own tax? Okay, that's good. I could, but I used to do it in the Army. I used to do it for the soldiers and so on. If you do your own taxes, you know most of the information you give the IRS is information they should already have. A relatively small amount of the questions are things that you have to tell the IRS. By all that's holy, you should just simply give them the information about that they don't know about you, and they should tell you what your bill is. Okay, they clearly can't, and that's if the amount of dollars that they're talking about, we could modernize the IRS to be able to be both a service to us, where they would essentially tell us so we wouldn't have to, when you get a 1099 or one doesn't come in, and you send your whole thing in, there's a whole process of doing it all over again because you never got that form. Okay, or because accidents happen, especially when things come in through the post office. But the fact is, they got a copy of it. Every single 1099 is dual file. So why is it I have to get my 1099? So yes, I object to the 87,000. I also object to the idea that they're scoring that for these billions of dollars, they're going to get this small amount of increase. Most of the revenue will be revenue to pay for the 87,000. They claim it pays for itself, but they don't claim that it actually improves the economy or that somehow there's this rampant tax cheat, because they're looking at all of these audits are effectively for below 200,000 of income. They already have very high levels of auditing for corporations and wealthy individuals. Yes.
Person, can't we kind of stop this before it starts?
Well, right now, we're hoping that one lone senator in Arizona will protect us for the rest of the year. If that bill falls apart, then we'll have less to fix. If it doesn't, undo some of it next year, because it'll likely be a split House Senate, or at least the administration will have to deal with the House. This is one of the reasons that there shouldn't be one. I mean, our government works better when there has to be actual compromises between the two parties. And it works when one party, not on everything, but on certain things, can basically run it. We've done a lot of good legislation, even in these last 2 years. 80%, sometimes 100% approval in both houses, because we work everything out and get to an agreement. The problem isn't the ones that we work to be bipartisan. It's the ones that are essentially one side wants things, and once they get it, and this is what they've done with Joe Manchin, they basically bribed him to change his vote. And I guess if you represent West Virginia, you tell them what West Virginia needs, and you get it. It's transactional. It's unfortunate though, because I don't believe Joe Manchin believes it's a good bill. I think he just believes it's good for West Virginia on balance, including a natural gas pipeline that he desperately wants from a party, bless their hearts, that seems to hate natural gas. It's kind of interesting that that's what he would extract. I'm very pleased to be here. I will say that it's very pleasing to know that I don't have a tough election, and that we can have this kind of a conversation, and that we can all be looking past into January for things like IT modernization. The mayor and I are both on the ballot, so we have to be a little careful. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is serve, and hopefully what we did here today and what we're going to keep doing is listening to you, and vice versa, trying to come up with things and selling you on where we think we can be helpful and work together. So I appreciate the chamber having me here in this outreach, and hopefully I didn't get too political. It's inevitable, but Paul and I generally balance our politics. He's a little more conservative than I am, but I can know that. Thank you. We do have
So, Congressman, just really quickly,
were you bored? That's a board.
it is. No, I just wanted to thank you. My name is Jennings with the U.S. Chamber. I'm one of our Western regional office, which is located here in Southern California. Obviously from your comments, it's I think evident to everybody in this room what kind of an innovative thinker you are and a deep thinker about the issues that are affecting not only our society, but of course the business community, the issues that are of utmost importance to the business community. And so I'm here today, really, it's my honor on behalf of the U.S. Chamber and the Escondido Chamber to present this award. It's called our Advocate for American Business Award. It's a new award. The look is new. It is new, right? Pretty nice.
Normally, everything you get is these new clear plastic ones. I've got like 50 of them, so it's nice to get something made with real wood.
That's right. And not only made with real wood, it's actually from a small business of ours, Flags of Valor. It's a small business company located in Virginia. It's a veteran home. All the employees are veterans, and they hand make these awards. So this is in recognition of your leadership on so many issues, obviously with the IT Modernization Caucus, your commitment to bipartisanship, as you mentioned as well, but your just championing of the business community and your really the stellar career that you've had in defense of business, defense of free enterprise, free markets. We truly appreciate it at the U.S. Chamber. So on behalf of the U.S. Chamber and the Escondido Chamber, I am honored to present you this award. Thank you.
Okay, well, so thank you very much. We really do appreciate that. Michael, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, quite a bit more to the.
Yeah. Thank you, Congressman. Next up, we have local CIO perspective. We have David Smith from Video County CIO.
Thank you very much. And I'm honored to follow the congressman. He mentioned briefly that he was involved in the county of San Diego IT modernization efforts some time ago. The county of San Diego outsourced its IT, which means that we pay an output provider to provide our IT to us. And the congressman was kind enough to chair the source selection committee over time and help us through that modernization process. As I stand before you here today, I'm in a uniquely, I think, a good position as a CIO, because I can say with 100% certainty that the county IT infrastructure is modern. It's very modern, much more so than I think you would find with many public and private entities out there. And a lot of that has to do with the work that Congress and I did. Why is that? Well, we have normalized our IT costs by turning it into software and infrastructure and hardware as a service. We buy that service, and then the outsourced provider is obligated to keep us current with IT at any given time. There's benefits to that. For example, when the economy is good, our IT is steady. When the economy is not so good, our IT is steady. Many organizations will cut back on IT and borrow that money from IT to pay for other services when things aren't great. Part of the reason why Congressman Rice was talking about the importance of giving the chief information officer, the chief technology officer, some budget authority. Because what ends up happening when you have these fluctuations in IT spending and everybody gets a new computer in year one, then the budgets go bad by year 3. Year 8, everybody's running a computer that is on 8-year-old software, the hardware is old, the security is old. So instead of just buying the incremental next system to improve, you now have to go out and revamp your entire network. You have to buy all new servers, all new desktops, all new laptops. And consequently, your costs are significantly higher than they would have if you had maintained a steady set of hardware. So the county is quite healthy in that regard. But that's not to say that we don't see a lot of opportunities out there. The congressman also spoke about teleworking and television. One of the neat things that happened, there's something called neat during the pandemic, and that's probably not a great term to use, but one of the things we discovered during the early days of the pandemic is that our efforts to modernize our IT in the past actually worked out quite well during the pandemic. So in March of 2020, you recall, there was a lot of talk about people need to isolate, quarantine. Ultimately, there were stay-at-home orders put into place and such. The county was able to transition over 13,000 county employees to a remote working environment seamlessly in 2 weeks. And the amount of effort, the pushback, the difficulty with our employees was virtually non-existent. In fact, our IT scores for our employees, our users, the individuals out there were higher that year than they had been in previous years. And why is that? It's because we had kept our IT modernized, knew that the telecommuting, that concept was developing. Microsoft, for example, was put together Teams as an environment and was pushing it out on Office 365 and 365. And we were adopting those technologies as part of our ongoing effort to remain current. So when it was time to suddenly go home, send everybody home to work, we merely had to make sure that either their home computer had the necessary software and security on it, such that they could connect into the county network, or alternatively, they had a laptop, and their laptop, they could make it up, and they went out the door and on it. There goes my water, not water technology. In any event, so we were quite successful in that regard. Now, where does that leave us today? The county of San Diego right now is looking, like I said, we've got pretty good infrastructure and such. So our modernization effort is focused less around the hardware piece and more around the experience that folks have when they come work with the county. Now, I'm a relatively new CIO and new CIO of the county, but I've been with the county for over 21 years. I was in the Office of County Counsel and a lawyer. The congressman pointed out, we're not necessarily additive. And so I decided to try to move over to the county technology office where I serve as the CIO. I have provided legal counsel for the county for years as the technology office. So it's a bit of a natural progression for me career-wise, at least I like to think.
But when I showed up in the IT, I had all sorts of things. I was going to talk about security, and certainly that's important. I was going to talk about device making our network and our environment more device agnostic, which is a fancy way of saying I want to be able to use Macintosh at work. A couple of other interesting initiatives, at least that I thought were interesting. But one of the things my office has been working on that I think is the most significant and the most important, both for you and for the workers at the county, is what we're calling digital services. Not what I would call the best name for it, although it's growing on me. And it really works into two different areas. It's the digital workplace for our county employees, and it's the digital works experience for the public. And what does that look like? Well, what we're trying to do is make it so that our employees can seamlessly work from anywhere, not just by using Teams, not just being able to access the network, but by having an experience that allows them to effectively collaborate with other company employees. It's so that they have something called a single sign-on. That is, you get into the environment once, and every time you open a new program, you don't have to sign in again. Right? We've all had that experience. While at the same time implementing security technologies that effectively the background is just the opposite, only letting the remote work into individual programs at a time so you don't expose your network to security risks. Lots of different things internal, but the really exciting stuff we're modernizing is in the public facing side of this. So let's say, for example, you want to go to the park, the county of San Diego Park, and you go to Google and you type in County of San Diego Park, or just San Diego County Parks, or parks in San Diego. There's a pretty good chance that the first thing that's going to come up on your Google search is going to be the County of San Diego Parks. Why is that? Well, it's because we've taken the time to do something called search engine optimization, which I suspect as business owners, many of you are familiar with. It's a process you go through by which you work with Google and you work with the analytics and things like the terminology and such. And it makes sure that when your business, the scope of what your business is searched for by somebody in your area, you're the first thing to come up on the top of the web screen, right? Sometimes you have to pay for that. That's how Google makes money. And then there are other things that are non-monetary you do to make that happen. So part of our digital experience is making sure that when somebody searches for something where we provide services, that we come up at the top of the search engine. Why is that? Well, if you're looking for county parks, most people are going to go stcounty.ca.gov, find the department, they drop down menu to the department, they think it's called parks, find the parks. Right? It's not how people search it. They go into Google, they search by parks. And so we're developing what we call search engine. We're using the search engine optimization with people to the websites. We also recognize that when you're looking for a county park, you don't really want to see anything about the county technology office. I think it's an empty office. My picture's okay on there. It's not great. My wife likes it. But in any event, I'm not driving traffic to the CTO office. We'll find a CTO website for our office. Why? Because practically speaking, there's not a lot of public interaction. But I do want to drive traffic to the parks website. And so part of this search engine optimization process is to make sure that happens. When you get to the website, we're doing some other things. We're standardizing what they look like. Now, you can imagine that can be a little bit of a challenge when you have lots of different departments with lots of different visions. And certainly we're not going in and telling parks and public, our property development services, for example, that their sites have to look identical. Not at all. But we do want people to have a common look and feel, right? We want you to get to our site. And if you're used to using the park site, you understand how to get around the park site. We don't want you to show up at the property development services site and have to relearn it, right? So creating some commonality and experience there. We're also doing some things involving forms. I know that sounds crazy, but preparation of a form on the internet, particularly with technology, graphic, programming and stuff, can be quite expensive, and it can be quite labor intensive. Moreover, if you're the user outside the county and you go to the county website and you got to fill out different forms, every form looks different. Every form requires a different extension or program to use. Every time you go to sign a form, you have to download a different widget or what have you. You're not going to have what I would call a good digital experience. So one of the other things we're working on is standardizing, for example, our forms. We're even going to the next level. One of the
One of the benefits our digital workers, our employees have is something called single sign-on. They sign into the environment and then it opens up everything for them. Yeah, there's some security behind that. It actually doesn't work quite that seamlessly, although it looks like it's. We're working on something comparable to that for the public, right? When you go to the county's website and you sign into parks, right? And maybe you create an account there because you want to reserve up at William Heights. You've never camped up at William Heights. It's a terrific campground like that. Camp that, there's some great hiking. So you go in and you set up an account, you reserve space at William Heights Park. Well, now you go over to the PDS website, Property Development Services, and you can get a permit. Okay, it's probably a whole different login system, whole different look and feel. We may not even use the same billing system for you. So for us, creating a common experience, so one logon works across all the different environments, so that we have common forms. So we need common information and such. We'll create a better digital user experience for the public so that when they come to our website, they get what they need, they get it quickly, and they can move on to do what it is that they're trying to accomplish. The last thing I want to talk about is something that's kind of cool that some of you may have heard about if you deal with IT much. It's something particularly if you've got programs you want to develop. I would suggest you look into, and this is one of the really cool, innovative things we're doing, and it's called low code. How many of you have heard of low code? Okay, a few of you. This would be the opposite of COBOL and Fortran. Think of low code as Legos for computer programs. Okay, my son is a software developer in a small company on the East Coast. He's trying to be one of the guys who made one, right? And so, he programs in something called Python, and we're well beyond the Fortran and COBOL of the year. But low code is even the next evolution of coding. Think of it as Legos. Okay, so you go down to the Lego store, you buy a Lego set, and they're Star Wars. So I get a X-wing Legos, right? I get a little set of plans, and I get the Legos. Now I could design an X-wing to save my life, right? I could not figure out from scratch how to do it. That is not my skill set. But I can sit there with plans, and I can say, okay, 4 red blocks, and I can do this. Right? Why? Because all the pieces and the shapes are already created. Low code is something akin to that. What low code is literally you take a program and you drop little pieces, and it's pre-programmed chunks of blocks that then can be used to create an actual system, a program that develops. So we've started to look into the low code environment, the development of it, and such. And we are really excited about this. In fact, you're going to see coming online as part of our digital experience some new ways for folks to participate in county programs to get information that will use these low code environments. In fact, one of the really neat things about the low code, one of us uses something called Paralysis. They have an emulator on it for phone, right? So you turn on your screen, you look at it, and it will actually automatically create it as a mobile app that is approved through the Apple system, right? And then the really cool thing is it's got 200 languages built. Right? And for those of you that interact with local government, work in local government, you know that we have requirements to have a certain number of languages. Our website is included a certain number of languages. So we can automatically meet those requirements. So we're looking to do some kind of cool, innovative things with low code and such. But this all builds in, like I said, it all starts with solid infrastructure. And from that solid infrastructure, we're able to build out now this technology, this digital service, digital experience. So that would be the local government perspective from my view. If you have any questions, we have to answer anyway. We're running behind it. So yeah.
So in terms of mechanization of the county and trying to help the county workforce, which is drastically understaffed in certain departments, and having trouble delivering services, what are you doing to help the employees process more applications, permits, and things faster?
Couple of thoughts on that. The first is our board is working to address the staffing issues, and I think like everybody out there, there's obviously issues with that. But the board in the most recent budget took steps to address a lot of those issues on staffing, and I know that the county is ramping that up right now. So hopefully, to the extent you're seeing issues with that, that will decrease over time. As far as how we're doing technology to support that, that's part of what I'm talking about with, for example, the out system, developing systems to make it easier for folks to interact with us electronically. As the congressman talked about, there are certain things we do with people that if we're able to automate it, are things that we'll be able to do with systems. And if we build systems, we will move more quicker, or they'll move more quickly again.
Continuing with the local CIO perspective, we have Jonathan Beckney, the CIO of the City of San Diego.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, happy to be here. And like David, City of San Diego, we've got contracts that maintain most of our systems, keep them current. There are exceptions. Those applications end up on a list that we pay close attention to and work with the departments that have them. Just some background on me. I've been CIO at the City of San Diego for about 8 years. And background on the city, we've got over 1.4 million residents. The city side, we've got 12,000 employees, 400 applications, 400 facility locations, and 40,000 network endpoints. Pay attention to from a security perspective. And when we look at modernization, I think David mentioned user experience. It's a big thing for us as well. So when we approach modernization, we really want to look at improving business processes, right? And providing that better user experience, streamlining workflow and getting those, even those manual processes into an electronic workflow. And then strengthening security and privacy, another big thing we do. And then providing better data for decision makers. So we are modernizing. We also want to make sure that we're approaching that data right, planning it out well. And you think about, the DMV is always, I think, the organization that people talk about when they talk about IT modernization. Can the DMV do this better, right? And we try to look at, what would the situation look like if Google was running the DMV or Amazon was running the DMV, right? It might be a different approach, and I think that's what we want to do in government. The city has been consolidating a lot of applications. We've got over 50 applications consolidated into a mobile app that runs our 311 service. It's called Get It Done. And that's been downloaded by over 125,000 San Diegans. So the adoption's been great on it. It provides over 50 services, everything from reporting potholes, ADA compliance, reporting storm drain issues, even applying for a passport. So a lot of city services rolled up in there. And the application generates over 1,000 service requests each day. So the adoption's high, and we're getting service requests from the residents. Some residents love it so much, they walk around their neighborhood with their phones and just take pictures of everything, right? Every issue they see, they send it to us, and we're thrilled with that adoption. But we've had to make adjustments now. We're getting an increase in service requests. And so our new budget has additional positions to help fill those roles where we've seen, operational backlogs from those service requests. So we are trying to, I think the end result of a project like that is we've improved the user experience, and we really are delivering more services that are the priorities of our residents, the things they care most about. And then on top of that, we'll do surveys with that application. We want to make sure we're getting it right. We want to make sure we know what the priorities are. So those surveys combined with some additional analytics can help us make overall service improvements. And the same thing in modernization from the data side. When we look at modernizing, we want to, again, improve the data and also build in efficiencies and drive service improvements from the data that's out there. The pandemic was a big driver. David talked about remote work. We were pretty far along in the remote work thing, so it wasn't a big deal for us. I think we stood up several thousand people in a few weeks, and it was pretty seamless. But we also expanded digital services for the residents and businesses to do more more digital service and, get rid of that old in-person model that big governments are known for. Things like electronic permitting and also virtual building inspections and even, they experienced more throughput with the virtual building inspections because, it's like, before when we were doing them on site, they say, yeah, we'll show up between 1 and 5 p.m. So like the cable guy, right? And so with those virtual inspections, they would make it at 1:45 to 2:15, right? They're able to just get more movement. So that was a big help. And then we also made additional progress on cybersecurity and privacy as we modernize different systems. Alongside of that, the benefit is always improved cybersecurity and privacy controls. And cybersecurity is a big deal for us in modernizing. Our rate of attacks have increased over 2,000% in the last 4 years, and I'm sure that's no surprise to anybody. That is just the state of security right now. And we moved to this hybrid teleworking model where our network is now extended to the home offices of thousands of our employees. So, again, the pandemic really helped us do that quickly, do that well, do that fast. But as we look at, modernization, it's never really done. We work with our city departments. We do quarterly reviews of their business applications and put together a 5-year roadmap with them. So if we see an application that's great today, but 3 years from now it becomes end of life, we want to start planning with them today to modernize that app. And sometimes it's just looking at an application. If it was released in 2012, it's a great application in 2012. But the technology world has changed, and the business requirements have changed. It might still be on a supported technology, but it's just not cutting it anymore, right? So that's another reason to modernize is really efficiencies, user experience. Once we work through an application portfolio, we modernized like 5 years ago. Well, now as we look at it, we say, hey, that's going to go over the legacy status again. So it's really a job that's never done. And then, one interesting thing I'm seeing is the, emerging technologies like quantum computers. If you're familiar with quantum computers, it's a different, completely different way of computing, really using the elements, quantum mechanics, superposition of atoms. It's not ones and zeros. It could be anything in between that, but that's provided in certain scenarios some very fast times, and that is making progress. And there are concerns that in the next couple of years, as quantum computers advance, that they'll be able to break our current day encryption. And we are seeing stories of nation states grabbing encrypted data. Maybe 2 years we'll be able to encrypt that, right? So the Department of Homeland Security released a guidance on that. They will be really providing new recommendations for encrypting data, but that'll have a profound impact on the whole IT industry. If we think about how we encrypt today and abandon that because quantum computers may be able to do that. So that's something that's coming down the line that I think we all keep an eye on, but the technology world is resilient, and I think everybody survived Y2K. We're all still here. We'll survive on computers too. That's all I've got, unless there are any questions. Thank you.
This time, I'm going to call up Barry Moss and Michael Storks for an industry panel. So you've heard all the great things that CIOs are doing, and now we're going to hear from the industry who's helping us behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Got the chairs out here for you. Are you gonna be able to see them if they sit down?
I'm about to sit.
We can stand up when we
I'm tired of sitting.
Well, I'm gonna sit over here because you guys have seen way too much of me today. Wow, you 16 people are really want to see. So first and foremost, why don't you just introduce yourself, who you're with, what you do, and provide that context.
Sure. I'm Mary Moss. I work for DocuSign in our public sector vertical. I manage all of the counties, Los Angeles South and the large cities, 150,000 population and greater. So actually Escondido is a customer of mine. And I also manage the state of Hawaii and all the large counties there. I've been at DocuSign about a year and a half, and thank you for letting us today.
I'm Michael Sparks with Zebra Technologies. So quick question, does anybody know who we are? One. Okay, that's typically what happens. So how many of y'all have ever had a package from UPS? How many of y'all have watched an NFL football game? So what Zebra does is we provide people the means and technology to add digital signatures to people and things, and equipment to track those digital signatures and capture data about them. Every NFL stadium is ringed with Zebra sensors, and the players wear Zebra tags. And that data is used to track player movement. The NFL then pumps that data out to the media so they can enhance your viewing experience. But more importantly, what happens is the coaches and training staff use that data for player performance and safety. We help UPS and FedEx and everybody else track product from one side of the country to the other, even give them the data on how to load their trucks. So we help them put a digital signature on those packages and then track that package across the country. And so what we want to do is, we've been doing that in the commercial world for a long time, is help bring some of that same data and technology to government as government begins to modernize and find more and more ways to accomplish. That's what Zebra does.
Appreciate that. You went very into what you do on the private sector side of things, but why the public sector? Why does Zebra, why does DocuSign want to work with the public sector?
So I think you all know who DocuSign is. I don't have to say that, right? Yeah, so we pioneered e-signature. We now have tools to help customers digitize and collaborate with forms and agreements. We've been in public sector for well over 10 years. In the United States, we have over 4,500 federal, county, city, and municipal customers. Just here in California, we have over 650 customers and over 40 million signers on the last 12 months. I did that yesterday. But what happened with the pandemic, right? The need to digitize became forefront, and in government agencies, just as the congressman said, we found a lot of legacy systems that were inadequate. So our goal to help digitize in government is to help your agencies meet your sustainability goals. You get your citizens accessible data in this new hybrid environment that we have. Also, you know, the high cost, help with the high cost of taxpayers. Once you, the cost to digitize documents versus having paper and printing paper, storing paper, is it's 84% cheaper per document once you have it digitized. So those are costs passed to your taxpayers. So federal government and state and local is a very large vertical DocuSign and a very important one to us.
So what's interesting from our perspective is the same challenges that we help commercial entities solve, those same workflows, those same challenges exist in government. So we put together a government team about 3 years ago to spend a lot of time listening and partnering with government agencies. So, okay, how can we take that same technology and now bring it into the government world? So you guys have supply chains that have to be automated and keep track of what stuff is. There's inventories that need to find out where is my stuff, make sure the right people have the stuff that you need. If you're the inspectors out in the field, they have the right types of equipment. We've been doing that in the commercial world for 52 years, and to some extent doing it in the government world as well. But we've never had a team dedicated to really listening and saying, okay, how can we adapt to government? So we started doing about 3 years ago, and that's why we're going around the world, the country doing fun stuff like these events.
Really appreciate that. Outside of this event, which is highly participated in, thank you for everyone for going out today. You usually don't get much press, not much coverage regarding IT modernization, need for it, and really why it's important. You know, what happens if we don't have IT? What are the reasons why we should be able to or
One bit of comment. You don't have a lot of press about IT modernization. But when you screw up, you do, don't you? There was a really fun video that went around. Kevin, what was that city that video was about, the PPE being destroyed?
It was one of the counties around San Francisco, San Mateo.
So they happened to have left about $3 or $4 million of PPE outside in the rain because they didn't know it was there. Well, guess what? That got lots and lots of press.
For those in government here, and I'm the mayor of a small town outside of Chicago, and I work with them. It's every one of our nightmares. We've all been through, whether you're staff or whether you're elected. And it was a hidden camera thing. And it was the ABC affiliate in San Francisco. If anybody's interested, I can send you the link. Here's what mattered. First of all, first story at the top of the hour at 6 o'clock, 6 minutes, which in their world is remarkable. 2.5 million hits in the first 2 weeks. And I felt sorry for the appointed official responsible because they caught her in an ambush with cameras. And we've all had that fear of the deer in the headlights moment. And it was because they didn't have asset management that provided real-time location and understanding on things. The county administrator did his job and he took his beating with the ticket. So for those of you who are professional staff, God bless you, because that's sometimes part of the game.
And so IT modernization, putting together automated tools, keep tracking your assets, inventory. You probably won't get a lot of positive press for it, but our constituents' expectations are going up. People are expecting faster responses. And so it'll help you meet those expectations and avoid the negative press. And in case you might get a couple of attaboys for doing the right thing.
I'll just cite an example. I think we believe in digitization, of course, at DocuSign, but I know we talked earlier about March 2020 when the pandemic. City of Los Angeles is one of my customers. They called us on a Friday afternoon and said, we need to get quarantine orders to the citizens of Los Angeles when we find out they have COVID ASAP. And we had a system up and running in the city of LA by Monday afternoon. So for them to be nimble and able to digitize and have that backend technology, they are able to get quarantine forms out. And Los Angeles is a huge city, and we're very happy about that opportunity.
So all day today we've talked about why it's important to digitize. Are there risks?
The only risk I would say is that it's not just about it at DocuSign taking forms and just digitizing them. It's a whole workflow process. And it's looking at that workflow from end to end, because we touch a lot of different systems as you're going through approvals and adding documents to other documents. And it's that whole process of just picking, oh, we need to get HR forms digitized. No, it's an entire workflow process that you need to look at. So look broader than just, digitizing forms. It's how do we make that whole workflow process efficient?
Another thing to think about is also, we're very concerned about security. And as you modernize and digitize, you start having a lot more access points into your networks. If you're putting forms and employees are using their personal phones, that personal phone is now exposing you to a lot of different places that people can hack in because they downloaded the latest version of Funky Farms or Crazy Birds or whatever else. So those become additional access points. And then you also be very careful making sure you get great data. Because if you put bad data in the system, it's going to proliferate very quickly throughout the entire network or the entire system. So make sure that your data capture is very precise as well, so you're proliferating bad data across the system.
I appreciate that. Both of you have extensive experiences working with state and local governments, helping to modernize. What obstacles do you usually see when folks, when the city comes to you and says, I want to do this, but I've never done this before, and what recommendations would you have for them as they go into it?
I'll go quick. I think the Congressman said that earlier. He said, it's not the mayor, it's not the city manager. You need to have a leader in technology supporting this program and pushing it down across your agencies in order to be successful. I know the gal at Escondido, who I know from economic development, you know, if there's, you know, one department may modernize technology, but doesn't go to the other departments, because I don't think you have that technology leadership to really push that down and touch all the various departments within or divisions within your agency.
Having plans and great point. I think we also see people, analysis paralysis. I mean, where do you start? You pick one project. You look for a project that's going to be the easiest to implement or the one that's going to have the quickest return and start there and then build. You know, it's the Lego blocks analogy, right? You pick one and you get started. I think we see a lot of agencies that will, you know, look at all the things that need to be done and spend 5 years planning instead of actually picking one and begin to see the results and actually making it happen. So pick something small, pick one, get started, make it happen.
Michael, you just mentioned something very interesting. You said return. So obviously there is return on investment for this kind of technology and digitization. It'd be very interesting to know if you've done those analyses, if you've looked at that, and if you could expand on the return on investment that this kind of technology provides.
Physical project. But typically we're looking at asset management. Your return is the elimination of loss. You know where your stuff is. It doesn't get lost, it gets left out the warehouse. We've done a number of projects in fire departments because they have to inventory that truck every time it comes back from a call. And it's typically a manual process. We have a couple of cities that have implemented RFID to automate that process of doing the inventory. They're cutting down the time by 95%. Their savings on the actual inventory they use is over 50%. So right there, it's a very simple return. So if you know where your stuff is and you can make sure that it's being used appropriately, you can get a very, very quick return. In Maryland Department of Transportation, they put an inventory process into place, and what used to take them 2 months now takes them 2 hours. Because everything has an RFID tag, and they can literally walk through a room with a magic wand and they've done their inventory, as opposed to having to pull things down, inspect them, find the serial numbers, write the serial numbers down, transpose 2 numbers, wonder why something's lost, but they have something more. It's real simple. You put that digitization in place, you can automate that process, and the savings in labor and lost stuff is pretty immense.
So it's my job and my team's job to help you with business cases and return on investment, because, you know, these are big projects across your agencies. Just in public sector alone, I pulled some numbers that we put together. We see 35% increase in employee productivity when you digitize documents, forms, agreements. You know, 89% improvement in turnaround time. You know, we have studies like 3 DocuSign contracts. It could take 14 days to get an agreement through approval processes and signed. We now see about 1.5 days with that automated. Error reduction, human error, that's reduced by 58%. And then just hard cost savings of no printing, no storage, no paper of 87%. And I do this every day for my customers of let's put a business case together, let's look at the ROI, you know, how are we going to, you know, show, you know, our community the value of this investment.
Thank you for that. Earlier this year, CTEC, Chamber Technology Engagement Center, which I'm policy director of, Joint Commercial Vice President of, actually did a fireside chat with Darrell and Darrell Issa on the creation of IT Modernization Caucus. And one of the things that came out from that is a lot of mayors, CIOs, CTOs are not aware that in the American Rescue Plan, there's actually funding down to the state and local governments, which can be used for modernization. This seems like there's no better time right now as we communicated today about using that funding, but if there's anything that you'd like to touch base on, those federal funds that are out there right now, that's something that local governments and state governments should be looking at to use.
Well, when I started City of LA, they used that funding. Another customer of ours, my colleague up north, the county of Santa Clara, they used that funding to create self-reporting for COVID tests for all their employees in the county before they could go back to work. So every week we had to go onto their intranet, a self-serving form, you know, when they had the test, what the results are, so they could go back to work. So that was another use case for those funds.
We're seeing a number of cases around the country where that funding is being used for, I think, people are pretty creative with the way they use it. But you heard a little earlier too about a couple of things, you know, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, hardware as a service. You don't have to outlay a huge chunk of money any longer to get a modernization effort started. And very often we can project that savings from the modernization will pay for itself. And so working with the company, so local service provider, and you do something as a service, now suddenly find that the savings, the elimination of loss, the additional efficiencies will pay for it or maintain it if you can find a way to start it.
That's great. You have government officials here, we've had government officials in the door all day long. And people from the public, what is the last thing that you want? If you had one thing that leaves with you today, what would that be? So it comes down to modernization.
I would just keep it simple. I mean, our goal is to give government employees the tools and processes to simplify and modernize their jobs so they can actually focus on the mission. I mean, that's in a nutshell is what we try to do at DocuSign in the public sector.
So I want you to go in with two takeaways. Number one is pick a project and get started. It could be something very, very simple. And then number two is make sure that you get the right equipment for the job. Very often we see people putting consumer grade devices in warehouses. And if you take your iPhone and you drop it on the cement, what happens? It typically breaks, right? Cracks, etc. And so what I encourage you to do is make sure that you're getting industrial equipment for industrial jobs and pick a project, get started. Give us a call. We'd be happy to help you find the right path or a path.
Yeah, we can definitely go to questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, do you work in the education with education?
Absolutely. No, we're doing a number of things in education today. We also do quite a bit of printing. So we're printing student IDs so that the students can have that digital signature, if you will, for checking in that classrooms. We are tracking students using that same technology so that you know who got on the bus for the field trip and then who got off the bus for the field trip. For student verification, if they have to do evacuation, put kids together very, very quickly. We're doing a lot of inventory for things like the textbooks, the Chromebooks that people are handing out, knowing what you've got and making sure it's in the right classroom or the right district can save a tremendous amount of money. So we're doing a lot of things in education.
You can track computers and different rooms and all that inventory. And then you're talking about the paper work, digitalizing paperwork and making things a little more efficient and so on, right?
Absolutely. Registrar. Yeah.
Yeah, like to talk to you about that.
So with DocuSign, I mean, legally in the state of California, is that considered like a wet signature then?
Yeah, so DocuSign is what's called FedRAMP, couple things, FedRAMP moderate authorized. Yeah. So all our government customers are in a secure US managed cloud environment. And then each document has attached with a certificate of completion that shows everyone's when they signed, what IT address they signed at, who signed through the whole workflow. And that certificate of completion has actually been held up in court several times. And we cite to that.
I have a follow-up to this. So as far as like in California for things like ballot issues, you know, you actually have to go out and get physical signatures for people on a piece of paper. There's actually some groups that are pushing to make that digitized. That way people can sign at home. That way, especially with the pandemic, it highlighted that there's a lot of initiatives that never made it because they just people weren't out. So, but if you just were able to do it online, I mean.
Oh, absolutely, or even if you just came to the door with an iPad and had some.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, that would actually be technically them putting your finger to the iPad is technically would be a wet signature. because
That's right.
That's how long.
And then you have that certificate of completion for all of us.
Yeah, because someone was actually asking me about that, there's some ballot. Talking about.
Yeah, the Register of Voters in Orange County is one of my largest customers. They use it primarily for their volunteers, and people who need to work and
Yeah.
just ID checking and things like that. But that's a great use case.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions? Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.